It's And good morning to my fellow folks here in Australia and New Zealand. Good afternoon and good evening to those in Canada, United States, and hello to elsewhere and beyond. My name is Michael Haynes, and welcome to another edition of Breaking Through in B2B. Breaking Through in B2B is a live stream internet show dedicated to helping the CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders of service-based B2B companies to educate and inspire them and build and grow their businesses. Great pleasure today to have friend and colleague Brett Trainer to be joining us today. Now, today's theme is all about business innovation, about how we as leaders of service-based businesses can build and grow our business. Today's focus is going to be really on the listening aspect, how we as leaders of service-based firms, small and medium companies, can use listening approaches to build and grow our business. And so with us, we've got Brett, who is the CEO of a professional services firm, also a podcast host and founder as well, to give us some of his insights and perspectives. Brett, great to see you. Great to have you on the show today. Fantastic to have you here. So for our folks, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your professional services firm, to kind of help kick things off?
Yeah, Michael, always great to see you and always glad to have a conversation. I think 9 out of 10 of our conversations are offline, so it's good to actually finally have one of these online, right, as we have it. But yeah, so I think maybe professional services as we used to think it might be changing a little bit, right? And so the company that I'm building, it's still evolving, kind of has multiple revenue streams, right? So as I think about sales or even take a step back, what they are, right? So I would say my day job or the prime, business is my fractional business, right? Where I'm still working with other B2B companies. I'm selling myself as a service. I'm also a partner in another business, a different revenue stream where I'm helping drive new business into that organization, which is a completely different business, a different set of challenges we can get into later. And then also I've got the podcast and the coaching business that I do with the corporate escapee, which is not true B2C, but it's a B2B-ish type, but 3 very different audiences. And so over the last couple of years, I've been really trying to figure out the best channels, the best ways to reach these folks. And so that's where we're at today.
Okay, that's fantastic, Brett. So first of all, so what we're hearing from you in terms of just where things are at in terms of professional service firms is that having multiple revenue streams, multiple lines of business is one of the key things to having a successful professional services firm. I'd like to, which leads me to, well, let's start getting right into the listening aspect. So can you talk to us as to what were some of the triggers? What were some of the listening triggers, insights that you were getting? And let's start maybe from a market point of view that has led you to start to develop this multiple stream business model, revenue model for your professional services firm. What were some of the insights? What were some of the insights, and where did you get some of those insights to help drive how you're building and constructing your firm?
Yeah, I think let's maybe break it down from the easiest to the most complex.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the fractional, and I don't want to say easy being the relative term, but a lot of my fractional work has come through word of mouth and referrals. So I'm not doing a lot of advertising or marketing specifically for it. I'm doing networking and talking to folks and building the relationships. But interestingly, when you talk about the listening, one of the things that's evolved in the last 4 years with this portion of the business is I started as consulting, right? Doing more of the hands-on, walking the clients through, managing the projects. And where I found the bigger opportunity, at least for my services, was more in the fractional and the advisory, right? There was a bigger need, a little bit lower down the food chain. And the only reason I know that is, talking to potential customers and prospects about needs and learning that early days, I would have just forced or morphed into what they were looking for in order to, accommodate what that was. But over time, again, starting to figure out where the market's going, where the opportunities lie, I kind of merged or morphed the business into more of a fractional approach. So that one, again, mostly relationships. Probably a lot of your audience is good with the referrals, those types of things. The second one, which is the Corporate Escapee, which is a podcast in coaching, was a little bit different, right? Because when I started, I had the grand vision, we got the podcast, I've got the audience, I'm going to do courses for this, right? I mean, professional services, it's going to be the coaching. But what I found through conversations with prospects and fellow escapees was the market need was much more of a, hey, I just need more of a high level. How do I get started? What are the things that I need to do in order to get there before you sell me a 12-week course on how to do it? So if I would have continued to push down that original path, I wouldn't have had the business. And it's like I said, it's kind of morphed as I have more conversations to try to meet the customers where they're at with what their needs are. So you've kind of seen an evolution of the podcast. The coaching offerings have kind of mirrored down that process. And before I go to the third one, I wanted to see if you had a question.
Yeah. So you talked about. So I wanted to kind of take a couple steps back a
Sure.
little bit,
Yeah.
because you're unpacking some great ways in which to, as part of the revenue model for a professional service firm, talking about consulting services, fractional services. You're talking about the podcasting. So in terms of identifying some of those, so from the fractional, you were saying in terms of that listening, how you identified that. You talked about referrals. Was it just through referrals, networking? Was there any specific things that you were doing to identify those opportunities? How did folks know, to come to you as a potential source as being a fractional? Because I guess to clarify, at least, and clarify me if I'm wrong, that fractional service is often really operating at a very senior level. Is it not? Is it not at a senior level? I mean, I myself am doing some fractional work, but we're operating really at that very senior executive advisory level, working directly with senior management. It takes what did you do in terms of steps to be able to operate at that level, operating as a very senior advisor into companies? Like how did you get on their radar, and in order to be considered as someone who can be offering those kinds of services?
Yeah, good question. And I flew right through that. So thank you for walking me back. And think interestingly with the fractional work, I think it depends on the size of the company, right?
Yep.
So the smaller the company, the more tactical you're going to be with some of the responsibilities that you have and what you're driving. The bigger the company, the more advisory that type of it is. And part of it has been relationships. Like you and I go, way back. And if we have
Yep.
opportunities that make sense, we share it with each other. But quite honestly, you brought the podcast up. A number of my referral partners were actually guests on the podcast who I had featured because they were doing some sort of complementary business, or even in some cases, the same type of either consulting or fractional. And what I found with that, part of it was unintentional. I wish I could say it was pure genius and that's the way I strategized it. But it helped me develop relationships like you and I came through. You've been on the podcast a number of times.
Yeah.
And it just opens up the world. And one of the things that I've seen, which I would strongly encourage folks, and I need to do a better job of it, is through referrals. Very few of us are actually doing, especially the professional services, the exact same thing for the exact same customers, right? There's plenty of business for all of us. And I found more power when we kind of, band together, but work together and share, and with those types of insights. So one, the podcast, again, developing networks with folks that are in the space, servicing the same types of customers that I am. And then two, just continuing to do, the networking piece of it, right? Meeting folks. You just never know when that next conversation is going to lead to a potential opportunity with somebody's business.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you, Brett, is that listening, to your contacts and your colleagues in your network. In terms of that, and I'm unpacking that a bit because I really want to guide folks as to what they should be doing. So is this talking to peers and to understand what's happening within our markets, within our industries, and if so, how do you go about doing so? Is it just around setting up coffee catch-ups? Do you have a regular kind of schedule rhythm of how do you kind of keep connected with your contacts and colleagues so that you can have those conversations, be tapping in? What are some of the things that you do, Brett?
Yeah, the big one is the podcast, because usually when I have those those opportunities that go out. And I don't want to say this is the only way to do it, because I am opportunistic and intentional about some of the other networking opportunities that don't come from the podcast. And it's really about, again, getting folks that are in the same space and, in different areas. For example, I just met with somebody today that's in, the data and analytics space and, working in manufacturing companies. We already exchanged 2 potential names for each of us to get to know somebody that could help both of our businesses. And it was just a one-off conversation, but it was still intentional that it wasn't like this, somebody was working at IBM, right? That's not who I'm selling into. So it has to be in the same area. But I find being intentional about that has been really helpful. And I really didn't start doing that until the last couple of years.
Okay, so I want to move into that podcast space, because we talk about listening to contact, tapping into our contacts and colleagues, which people can do through coffee catch-ups, through their industry and professional association, going to those events and doing listening that way. It sounds to me that the podcast can be a great way to get access to do listening, and to start those conversations. So. A couple of questions. One, what prompted you to start to delve into the podcast as a means to be having those intentional conversations? And so let's start from that standpoint. How did you? What led you to wanting to go to the podcasting and starting having conversations? Because I know from being a guest and listening to your podcast, you have tapped into and have been able to reach a whole array of thought leaders, industry experts, that people that are really at the top of their game, that many business owners would love to get access to. So what prompted you to, want to start the podcast, which I think goes back to like 2018 when you and I first started conversation.
4 years, 2019, I think it was.
You were kind of ahead of the curve, that you started well into this. So what triggers, what cues, what led you to going down that road, as my first question, in terms of let's unpacking this whole podcasting as a source of listening?
Yeah, I wish I could give you, it was like, I had the foresight to know that this was where the market was going. The honest answer is I started the podcast because I was writing a book, and my editor at the time suggested, hey, as you know, said, you should start a podcast, because then when you get the book ready, you'll have a built-in audience for the book. I'm like, what the hell is a podcast, right?
Right. Okay.
So I'm like, all right, it took forever. I finally hit record and got going. I'm still in the process of writing the book, but the podcast is now 200+ episodes. But honestly, that,
and very well ranked on Listen Notes, which is the Google of podcasts. You are ranked in like the top 5 or top 3% as well.
3, but I got to get back to 2.5.
Excuse me, sorry, but thank you. Yeah, awesome, fantastic.
But yeah, so to your point, and when I started it, it really was just to understand how podcasting works. And then I would say for the next couple of years, it was really around learning, right? Because it gave me access to people in different spaces, gave me access to you, and I could listen and compare notes and listen to authors, right? And I think that's how we hooked up the first time, was with your book when it came out, and it gave me that tool. But what I realized, probably within the last year, is if I was more intentional, I still want the really good guests, and that's not going to change. But the networking opportunities that I had with the folks, I started to leverage a little bit better. And I'll give you an example. So on the podcast, I've had other, fractionals, I've had consultants, right, in different areas, and I get to hear how they're running their business. And usually after that, when we'll stay in contact and, compare notes. But then I had just the most recent podcast episode came out with Anna Lundberg, who's based in the UK, and she's been working with, corporate escapees. She's the More Than 95, wrote a couple books. So she's been doing this for almost 5 years longer than I had been. And so just to compare notes and hear and listen to what she's doing was super helpful, right? Is there things that I'm missing that she's already uncovered, where 2 years ago I would have been afraid to even have her on the podcast because, we work with the same client. And so, like I said, I've been much more intentional about, it's still listening and learning for the most part, but it is creating other opportunities to expand, and you meet 2 more people. And then, pretty soon it's a multiplier effect of folks you get to meet.
So from what I'm hearing from you, Brett, the podcast is is a great source of listening. It's a great input to help driving and growing your business, because it's an opportunity for you to meet and start conversations with potential clients, with other thought leaders, other industry folks, so you can, is it fair to say, gain insights and understanding
Oh,
of
100%.
what's going on in terms of what's going on in terms of what's happening within industry, within the market, identifying certain needs, because it sounds as though the podcast has been helpful of you identifying opportunities with respect to the corporate escapee segment. Is that a fair comment to say that it's
Yeah.
been a great source of that, as well as being a business development tool to help start conversations with those potential people that you can then continue post the actual podcast episode itself? Is
It,
that is that a fair
100% fair and accurate. And I think the one thing that I still have not doing a good job with is all the content, right? Because I get subject matter experts on that just have a lot of wisdom, and I'll replay and if they can go find the podcast on podcasts, but I'm just now starting to chop up some of the interviews and pull the best pieces and then summarize for folks. And I'll give you one other piece of, again, back to the listening piece. I don't even know if you and I have talked about this yet. So maybe it's news, maybe it's not news, but getting feedback from the podcast audience, right? Because it was usually, what I found was there was really two pieces of the audience, and I was trying to serve both with one podcast, right? There's the folks that are still in corporate looking to leave or maybe leave or don't have the confidence yet to leave. So we want to show aspirationally and inspiration of where to go. Folks that just left that are trying to figure out their way, they're listening to learn what other folks are doing. But then I started to move into some of the growth topics, right? And that audience isn't ready for the growth. So what I'm doing is actually spinning off a second podcast that's going to be hyper focused on the growth of these small businesses, right? So kind of a part two, you graduate from this, you go to this, but without listening to hear what the audience was telling me and the feedback or what they weren't saying, right? It would have continued down kind of mixed match. I would have had mixed messages. I probably would have lost some of the audience. So yeah, that's, again, just part of that evolution or innovation, if you will, of where it's going, just to align with where
That's fantastic, Brett, because I think this is a really great value to listeners. It's also great learnings for myself as well, that we're seeing that, in terms of how you being able to listen to potential, in terms of listening to the market, as well as listening to buyers, that the podcast can be a tool to get access to both, because you can be intentional and potentially get potential buyers on as guests, for which you can have conversations and unpack their needs, objectives, where they're going moving forward. But you can also get other industry experts. Your audience as well can be a source of tapping into what the market needs are. And it sounds like, from what you're telling us, from your audience, you started to identify additional needs, which had then led you to innovate by developing a new podcast and also starting to build out some other opportunities and other offerings. So that's quite, I think, useful, insightful about how, podcasting can be a great tool to listen to the market, listen to your buyer, to give you some of the triggers, ideas, and insights to drive growth. I want to get from your perspective, how easy are you finding it to get potential buyers onto a podcast? So I think many of our small, medium business owners and leaders would be like, "Oh, that sounds really good, but how the heck am I going to do so?" I'd be interested to get. I mean, I've got my perspective. I'd be interested to get your perspective of how easy is it to get a potential client prospect that you want to be engaging, to get them onto a podcast, and why you think that is. I get your perspective.
It's a great question. I definitely want to hear yours, because this is one area, and I know folks that have done it super successfully, right? They've even built a podcast just to get their prospects to be guests on their podcast. And I've taken a slightly different approach with that, where I want my future or potential clients to listen to the podcast, right? Because I can share certain topics or say, yeah, I just had this, marketing expert who's killing it on YouTube, and as a service business, I took some of her ideas. So I start to share the things that I learned within those, and feed it back.
Yeah.
And what I'm finding is indirectly, the folks that never comment on your content or like or anything are the ones that become the buyers. It's amazing that the lurkers that are out there just sit silently until they're ready to reach out. And like I said, I had no idea they listened to the podcast. I had no idea they followed the LinkedIn content. And maybe just to reiterate, because we talk about the podcast, and I'm sure there's folks out there going, oh my God, there's no way I can do it. Honestly, it's not that hard. And then there's part two of that is there's other steps, right? I know you do a lot of video and YouTube and this thing. It's the same thing, right? If you're just intentional about it and start to create the content and invite, potential guests to a YouTube channel or shorts that you're starting to do, you're doing a feature series. And again, I am not a media expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm still figuring it out as I go. And I do strongly encourage you probably hear some folks going, oh, it's too late. There's so many podcasts out there. Well, you know what? A lot of the people that start podcasts do like 4 episodes, say, oh, I'm not getting a ton of business. I'm out, right? There's still a big opportunity in the podcasting space because people like to listen, right? When they're doing their other things, video's great, YouTube's great. But if you've got just even short 10-minute video or audio podcasts can make a huge difference just getting started that way. And with, the services are out there, it's not, the expenses and shouldn't be a barrier anymore. And the other thing I found is people don't necessarily like the super produced ones, right? You don't have to go overly deep and do the NPR studio production type of thing. They like the human aspect of it. I mean, you want to have good sound quality, those types of things. So, yeah. And I didn't really mean for this to become a podcast promotion episode, but as I'm talking, you're making me think through it. I'm like, wow, there really has been a lot of benefits to me doing this that I may not have appreciated.
Well, from my perspective, again, because in terms of how do we tap in, how do we able to listen to understand, the needs of our buyers, needs of the market. There are other tools that you can be using, your industry and professional associations. There's various kinds of market research, secondary research, many of which I'll be going through in my B2B Innovation Challenge next month. But podcasting is one that and I'm going to say the whole internet live show is something that is often overlooked as a means to gain understanding in a very cost-effective, but also value-driven, value-added way at both the market level and the buyer level.
100%.
From my perspective, I think that a lot of it's a great way to start conversations and interact with your buyers, your potential senior leaders that you want to engage and connect with, because in terms of from what I've been observing in the market, there's a big need for a couple of things. One, that need for interaction and connection amongst decision makers, business owners. There's a big need for that, and that has been identified through a number of sources. Gartner's done their studies. Some of the big consulting firms have done their various studies, and there has been a big trend around online communities, mastermind. Leaders are looking for ways to connect, to get different ideas, perspectives. Is what I call AIR. They're in need of AIR: advice, insights, recommendations. They're looking for that. I think that's one big thing a lot of buyers are looking for. So where they have opportunities, where they may be able to meet other experts, colleagues, etc. I think there's a big opportunity, a need for that. The need for connection and engagement as well is another big driver around that. And I also think many buyers of our clients that we're looking for, they're also looking to build their own brand and get more exposure as well. And I think those needs that we're seeing, what I've been observing in terms of B2B bar, has made it much easier that when you're approaching senior leaders, business owners, they're looking for opportunities to give their businesses more exposure, tapping into new markets, and also building more connection. So there tends to be, I think, a lot more easy willingness, because no one wants to get sold to, but where there are opportunities for engagement and connection and potentially promotion of their own businesses, expanding their own audiences, and helping meet their own objectives, collaboration. It makes it much easier to do so when they see that there's going to be value for them in terms of insights, in terms of connections, and potentially further growth, promotion and growth opportunities. So it's a lot easier to kind of get your foot in the door and get that opportunity to start the conversation. how have you found in terms of you being able to, kind of penetrate in terms of experts and potential clients? How have you found using your product? Has it been difficult? Has it been easy? What has been your experience in terms of trying to get, to the top echelons, whether we're talking experts or potential clients, prospects, in terms of getting them onto the podcast?
I think it's easier than you would think, right? Because they're looking for a platform, and the one thing I've been super careful about is making sure it's a good fit,
Yeah,
right? And I'll say this: my audience may not be who you're looking for, right? If it's an author, I want to make sure that even if I can get value out of them from the podcast, if they're not going to because it's not the right audience, I'll just tell them up front that I don't think this is the right fit. And as much as I want to have you on, you're not going to get the benefit out. Now, sometimes they still want to come on anyway. I'm like, okay,
yeah,
perfect. But I would say the majority of the time, I want to make sure it's a good fit for both. And just along these lines, if you're looking to network with folks and you do listen to podcasts and you hear somebody on there that you want to connect with, I would say I have a 95%, if not higher, success rate of connecting with folks on LinkedIn after I hear them on a podcast. Very, very few have not accepted my invitation to connect and start the conversation, right? I'm not going into the selling mode, but say, I just heard you on, the Mixergy podcast, really enjoyed the interview, appreciate what you're doing. Thanks. 9 times out of 10, if not more, they connect back. And all of a sudden I've got a new connection within my network. So I think it's an underappreciated strategy, especially if you are using LinkedIn,
yeah,
to get some of those folks. And it's honest. I did like that. If I don't like them on the
yeah.
podcast, I'm not going to connect with them. But
Okay.
if
Great, awesome. Okay, so we've delved quite a bit in terms of unpacking, using podcast live streaming as a source of listening to market, listening to customers, how your guests as well as your audiences can be sources of insight. Next question: are there other things, other tools other than networking, leveraging the podcast as sources of listening to help guide where you're taking your business? Are there other things apart from those two elements that you've been using as part of guiding in terms of how you're taking your firm, your business forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I was going to go there, but you're perfect host. You led me right into it. Yeah, because there's another company that I've partnered with that it aligns with my values. I like what they're doing, and so this isn't something that I'm necessarily selling under my brand, but helping him sell under his. And so I can't use the podcast. I mean, I do a little bit just to talk about
Right.
some of the benefits, but it's a training and services company. And the approach that I've taken is he had a single offering, right, that he was taking to the market and trying to get into the B2B space. And that's where he was going. And obviously that's where my experience was. And so I'm like, I think I can help. But one of the strategies that I've been using, and it's twofold, is reaching out to people in my network that I've known that are in kind of the target space that I'm going after, and saying, hey, I could really use, your advice or perspective on this, right? I think this is a great program and a great tool for folks. Would you mind taking a look at it and giving me your advice? What would you do differently? Or do you see the same things I'm seeing with this? Most of the time they're going to come back and say, yeah, I do think that's actually a good fit. Maybe within their company. And if not within their company, do you know somebody else that you maybe could introduce me to, you think this would be a good fit for? So I don't have any of my own collateral or those types of things. This is really just selling or developing business off of a need of what that company has with the tool or training that somebody else had. Did that make sense, or did I confuse it?
Um, okay, so in terms of, so from a listening point of view, so is it that you've identified this potential offering that you may want to be offering as part of your business, but you've used some of your own clients and contacts to kind of get their, I don't know, pre-beta, kind of getting their input as to value, interest, kind of having them kind of giving a independent third party review of this potential new offering. Is that what I'm hearing in terms of
Yeah.
what you've done in terms of determining, is this something I really want to be bringing into my business? Let me ask some of my clients and contacts
No,
before I really.
it's more of I want to drive this, and so I'd
Yeah,
say yes plus, because what I'm trying to do is get feedback from potential buyers, even if they don't
yeah,
buy. Is this going to fill a need, or fix a problem that you're having the way it's structured now? If not, how would you structure it differently?
right.
And an example is the original one was a 6-week program, and an hour per day or an hour per week over 6 weeks. And my thought was it's going to be a harder sell to get an organization to commit to 6 weeks with people to do that. So I said, what is your thoughts on if we did like an accelerator, a 3.5 hour, 1 day course type of an approach? Would that make sense? So that's where I wanted the listening. Is I didn't want to trust my judgment to
Yeah.
say this is what makes sense, and this is the value that you would get from it. You tell me what you're thinking and what you're hearing. And again, I always start, you won't hurt my feelings. If you don't like it, you don't think it's a good fit, you don't like the way it's structured, tell me now, because I truly believe in the product or I wouldn't have partnered with them. But I also want to make sure that we're listening to the market and take as much friction out of the process as possible and give us the best chance of success as we're going through it.
Okay, and this is great, Brett. So what I'm hearing from you is that you have taken a potential offering, a prototype, we'll call it,
No,
and
it was an actual offering that was
an
in the
actual offering,
market.
but you've
Yeah.
gone to your clients, you've taken, this is the potential, this is an offering that I'm looking to offer, and you basically said, here's an offering that I'm going to be taking as part of my model for my business to offer to my clients. Tell me, as being within a trusted, valued client, tell me what you think. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What would make it work? So getting that direct feedback directly on that actual offering as it stands, so that you can modify and refine it. How did you go about doing that in terms of, was that by email? Was that having Zoom calls? How did you go about, eliciting that direct, getting that feedback with regard to that offering? How did you go about doing that listening? Was it, by email? Was it having a quick conversation? How did you get those
Yeah.
insights and
Some of
feedback?
the folks that I've reached out to, I wouldn't have had recent emails. So I used LinkedIn, just said,
Yep.
hey, you're in this space. I respect your opinion, which I do. I'm starting with the
Yeah.
folks that I trust
Yeah.
what they're going to tell me. But so I got connected back via LinkedIn. I said, hey, can I send you this, right, with some feedback? And I had the CEO of the company actually record some custom videos for some of the folks just to give his perspective on why he thinks this program. And again, that's what I wanted to get back to your point on the listening, is what was the feedback? Was I having a better response from, the custom video that took him 35 seconds or 40 seconds to record for these and personalize it? Or was it fine just doing the email, right, with the deck, and said, hey, can we get some feedback? So I know I kind of convoluted that a little bit, but basically LinkedIn to email.
Yeah.
And then I tested it a couple different ways to say, hey, if I did a personal email with it, was I getting a better response versus non-personal? And test, obviously you can't do that at scale, but once we're getting some momentum with the product, I'm open to test different things, and again,
Yeah.
get the feedback back from the market that says, hey, this is what's resonating.
So, okay, so you're leading me to make some further inquiries there. So you're asking for feedback on the offering, and then so my question to you, sounds as though you're also taking learnings as to what mechanism to get feedback works, and taking learnings to drive how you further communicate. I'm also curious to understand what did you do, or what did you do as a result of the feedback itself? So you got learnings from understanding how best to communicate and engage, but what about in terms of the feedback that you got in itself? Did that drive any future action, subsequent actions
Yes.
from that?
So basically, we've gone from the one offering to the three. So now we've got a good, better, best, right? Knowing
Okay.
you're going to see better results if you do the full program, but knowing time, right? So kind of we've got a solution for any budget,
Okay.
wherever you have it. But it still makes sense that everybody's going to get value for it. It makes
Yeah.
sense. And just one other thing that I point out, and that I tested, and I wish I could give credit to the person who shared this with me before, but I kind of switched from asking for feedback to give me advice, right? So, because if I'm asking for feedback, they're going to say, well, do this to this slide. I'm like, well, here's this. What advice would you have for me if I'm going to the head of customer success to sell this? What give me share? And that it's been crazy how effective that's been, from, being backward looking to say, this is what I would have done differently, to, hey, here's what you can do in the future. And it's just a simple phrase change, but it's been crazy.
Okay, but that in itself is a great insight, to say ask for advice, because advice is going to more be forward moving to enable you to better innovate and know where you need to make those changes, improvements, iterations, by asking for advice, as opposed to feedback, which might not be as valuable or as actionable.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's
Awesome.
Crazy. It works.
That's really good. Well, Brett, this has been an absolute fantastic conversation, because you've really unpacked how, there's different kinds of listening. We can be listening, tapping into our contacts and colleagues as a form of listening, leveraging your podcast live stream as a source of listening to gain listening through the audience and getting their feedback to identify opportunities, interviewing your experts, potential clients, and being able to get that insight at a market and a buyer level, and how asking for feedback on offerings itself and asking for advice directly to trusted clients, contacts on how to improve. These are all ways that we can be leveraging as small, medium business owners to do listening, to drive the innovations and improvements to improve and grow our businesses. So, Brett, for people that want to connect with you, learn more, listen to your podcast, tell them how they can connect with you. Tell us about the podcast. How can we connect, engage, listen to you, Brett, as well as a business owner, as a subject matter expert?
One, thank you for having me on, and two, for making me think about some of this, because now I'm going to be even more intentional about some of the stuff we talked about, right, and make it more of the strategy for it. And the best way for folks to get me is on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll have it posted, but just Brett Trainer, 3 T's between the two there. You can get the links to the podcast, which is the Corporate Escapee. Look for Hardwired for Growth 2.0 to come out probably the first, maybe late May, early June. But yeah, just if anybody has any questions, the other thing I've found is I'm happy to talk to anybody. If anybody has a question, please do connect with me. We can schedule a quick call, and I'm happy to share, what I've learned, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and give feedback. So if we're not connected, please do connect, and don't be shy.
Well, Brett, thank you again. This has been a great conversation. So, folks, this concludes this episode of Breaking Through in B2B. For more insights on how to build and grow your service-based business, please check out my website, listeninnovategrow.com. And also next month, May, is Business Innovation Month. I'm going to be having a B2B innovation challenge for small and medium businesses. So it's a 5-day challenge where we're going to help work together on how you build your innovation roadmap to build and grow your service-based business. So for details on that, go to listeninnovategrow.com/B2B challenge. I'm Michael Haynes. Until next time, thank you so much. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.